Welcome, everybody, to Write Better Together. I'm John Myers. Hey, look, everybody, it's Emily Brooks.
Hello, John Myers.
Hi. What's going on today?
Well, we have quite the guest again.
Oh.
We have the guest, drumroll, Kerrie Droban.
Wow.
Who you're going to learn more about, but she does a true crime podcast. She's an author. She's won all these awards. She's been on TV. She's amazing. And what is she going to be talking about?
She's been on the real TV. She's going to be talking about unraveling truths and using them in your narrative.
Yes. So obviously she's written a lot about her own experiences. And so if you're a nonfiction writer, or even if you're a fiction writer, I think that this is a great episode for you. Before we get to the interview, we are going to have our call to action responses. I'm going to try to stump John Myers a little earlier in this episode. And then during our interview, towards the end, Kerrie Droban has a call to action for everybody.
And she plays a game.
And we play a game. And she double crosses
the game.
She hosts the game. I was going to say she double crosses us. That's not even the right word. But
she conspired with you. That's not double crossing.
It's not double crossing. What she did was we created a game, and then she created another game.
Oh yeah, that's true.
So it's a double game.
Yeah.
That's all I meant.
Cool. I have fond memories of that.
So our call to action response today comes from Larissa, who is a teacher, correct?
Correct. So in a previous episode of Write Better Together, I said that Larissa taught middle school or 8th grade or something like that. I was in error. Put a big giant correction flashing thing on the screen. She teaches, not only does she teach high school students, but she teaches pre-college. What's the pre-college? Dual credit. She teaches dual credit seniors as well. And so
that's what I do.
So there you go. That's what Emily does.
Yeah. The reason why that's relevant is because Larissa responded to our call to action where we asked people to give their Barnabas name. In other words, a name that their community would give them based on their positive characteristics. And Larissa asked her students for her name. So she says this: 8th period has spoken. There are 2 camps. One says optimistic unicorn.
Okay.
The other says language Batman, and then 20 question marks.
Language Batman. We should have asked Larissa which one she identifies with. And do you know?
They're both great.
Have you met Larissa?
Huh?
Have you met Larissa?
I haven't.
So yeah, they're both great, and they both apply to her. Even though we're doing a truncated beginning of the show, we still have to tell people that we did get out of our bubble since the last episode. And
I skipped through that part again.
So go ahead and tell them what you did.
So I went to the Tennessee Writing Conference, which was amazing, but I'm not going to tell you about it because we're going to tell you about it in a future episode. We're going to go into more detail.
Yeah, we can talk more detail about it.
But it was great.
I went to... Well, go ahead.
I just said it was great.
Oh, cool. I went to... so last Saturday was Record Store Day. And so I went to a record store. And I have a story to tell about that, but we'll do that on a future episode. However, in a previous episode, I do want to say another correction, since this is my chance to make corrections like with Larissa. I said that Pete Davidson would probably never come back to this little small town because of the bad experience that he had. Well, guess what? He went to the record store that I went to, and he loved it, and he bought hip hop, if you want to know what he bought. And then he went to the car wash. How did he have? I don't know why he had a car. Is he driving across the country? But he went to the car wash, and there were pictures of him with the kid wearing the car wash t-shirt. And so he had a lovely experience in this town, and now I've corrected that, and Pete Davidson was all right with everyone, and there you go. So
what a nice guy. All right. Before we get to the next section, we need to warn parents or anybody who is a little bit wary of violence.
Oh my gosh. I am. Can I leave?
So Kerrie Droban is going to be talking about
A
true crime, murder, things like that. So if that makes you uncomfortable, just keep that in mind. She doesn't go into too many details. But also, this next segment where I stump John Myers is also going to be a little bit gruesome. So just keep that in mind if you want to put in headphones your kids don't hear, or if you don't want to hear, I totally understand.
What if I don't want to hear? Viewer discretion
You
is
have no
advised.
choice here. Hey, John Myers.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm scared. Okay. Yesterday, I had lunch with my sister, and she goes, "Guys, I need to tell you something." And my sister's very like charismatic, and she was just like, "This changed my life." She was like, I don't know what I think about the world anymore. She was like, it kept me up. So this is like get ready.
Is it?
She said,
Is this
"Why didn't
about
I?"
Is this about the miracle of childbirth? Because the miracle of childbirth is disgustingly gross. Is this where we're going with this?
This is not even close. This is something that she goes, "Why didn't I learn this in history?"
Okay.
Did you know? This is so gross. Did you know that in the 17th century, 16th, 17th century, nobles in Europe were eating embalmed bodies?
Why are you laughing at this?
Because I'm horrified. I laugh when I'm scared.
Oh, okay. I'm horrified as well, but I'm laughing because you're laughing. So they ate embalmed intestines. Is that what you just said? I only heard half of it.
Embalmed humans.
They
They were
ate
eating
all,
they were
the whole
eating
human.
mummies. They were eating mummies.
Emily.
This is not, and here I'm gonna go full circle into writing about and why this is important.
Wait, I thought,
So
hey, John Myers, I was supposed to guess something. What am I supposed to guess? The
I don't have you
tastiest
guess
part of the
things.
embalmed person?
Yeah.
Um,
I'll ask you a question.
okay.
So the Smithsonian Magazine has an article called "The Gruesome History of Eating Corpses as Medicine," and the introduction says, "This is the question." You're not actually supposed to answer this. The question was not, "Should you eat human flesh?" says one historian, but "What sort of flesh should you eat?"
So you're asking me?
No, it's a rhetorical question.
The pork chop is what you should eat. Is that on a human? This is disgusting. I did not know that this episode would involve cannibalism.
I'm so sorry.
I don't even know. Is it cannibalism if they're already dead and embalmed?
Well, you don't eat live people. Cannibals don't eat live people.
Are you speaking for all cannibals now?
Yes.
Are you the voice of cannibalism?
Yes.
Okay.
So here's why this is so shocking to me and my sister, at least, is that we didn't learn this in history. First of all, because we kind of lighten history, right? But
For
what
good
we did
reason we
learn
didn't learn
about,
this.
huh?
For good reason we didn't learn this.
But what we did learn
Yes.
was about the South American Aztecs who did human sacrifices and sometimes drank blood, and then we learned about these other cultures that were cannibals and that did all this, but they didn't tell us about the Europeans, the white upper class noble Europeans who were doing this. And I think that that's a double standard, that we think that a progressive, I'm doing quote unquote, a progressive society is somehow not doing these horrific things, and they were. And so it's something my dad, if he's listening, he talks about this all the time, the myth of progress, the idea that the more quote unquote advanced a society is, that somehow they are better or more intelligent or more moralistic, and that that's not always the case.
Well, I agree with that part. 100%.
What do you disagree with?
The topic in general. I mean, I'm not doubting that it happened, and I agree with your dad's assessment. I do not agree that we should be discussing such topics. I would like to hide it under the bushel of history and pile a bunch of history books on top of it, so this news never gets out. And, so we always ask you to share our podcast. Do not share this episode.
Sure. Yeah.
And it also brings up questions like noble, like you said, these are the noble Romans, like the pizza, noble Romans pizza. Is that what is involved in this somehow?
No.
Okay, well, that's good.
All I have from, you'll have to read the article because it goes into a lot more detail than I can get into now.
Okay. I'm sure that will never happen.
I'm just giving you an introduction to the topic. If anybody is interested, they can look more into it. It's gross. I'm sorry. I apologize, but
I like how you tried to throw your sister under the bus for bringing this topic up when you could have kept it to yourself. You did not need to bring it before.
My sister was very passionate about the word getting out, and I decided that I would fulfill that. So
to right the wrong of it being hidden, your sister felt she needed to spread.
Yeah, it's like people need to know.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can see that.
Yeah.
But I didn't learn any of those things. So you said, well, we learned about this, but we didn't learn about that. I didn't learn about this. I didn't learn about the.
Oh, I was terrified growing up of we learned about all the stuff that Egyptians did with mummies, and I don't think they were eating them. I don't know. And sacrifices with the Aztecs and all the stuff that made me fear these other people from history, not realizing that it was everywhere. It wasn't just, it's a human thing, not like a specific people thing.
Okay, now we know. For those of you that are still listening and are going to stay tuned for Kerrie Droban's interview, there's no cannibalism in that story.
No.
That we know of.
What I said was much worse than anything she says, but she is going to also highlight some of the gruesome nature of humanity. So if you need some hope, listen to a different episode.
There you go. I have something hopeful, and that's we're gonna swap something, and then depending on what I swap, I'm pretty sure there's no cannibalism in it.
That's good.
There's not.
Generally, I don't like the topic.
Well, that's good to know, because you sure were laughing a lot at the beginning.
I laugh when I'm nervous. I'm sorry.
All right. So we're going to swap something, and we're going to give each other notes on our writing, and we're going to be open and vulnerable and bleed in front of you.
Yep.
And what might you be sharing? And I'll tell you what I might be sharing.
Yeah. So I'm planning on sending John Myers my novel. Current title is The Last Divers of Amera. It is a YA fantasy novel that is 85,000 words.
Oh my goodness. Did I say a month? It might be 2 months. I will probably be sharing Discovering Caroline, and that's a script. That's a thriller. I might just share a rom-com. Why did I say just? Meeting Alexander. I might share that one. It'll be 100 pages with lots of white space.
Yes, 100 pages on a screenplay is a bit, yeah.
It might be 112 pages, something like that. But that'll be the longest it could possibly be. And then we'll report back.
Yeah.
And there you go. Speaking of reporting, here comes an interview. Welcome, everybody, to Write Better Together. I'm John Myers. Hey, look, everybody. It's Emily Brooks.
Hello, John Myers. Hey, look, everybody. It's Kerrie Droban.
Kerrie Droban. How did she get here?
Yes, we are interviewing Kerrie Droban today. We're so excited. Kerrie is an award-winning true crime author / podcaster, attorney, and television journalist. She writes about violent subcultures, undercover laws, outlaw motorcycle gangs, and criminal pathology. She's appeared on numerous television documentaries and shows, including American Greed, the History Channel, Netflix, A&E, Investigation ID, People Magazine, and CNN. Her books have been made into a popular television series, Gangland, Undercover, and optioned for film. So, Kerrie, you have been very busy.
I have been. Thank you for having me on this podcast.
Thank
Kerrie's used to
you.
being on the real TV and
Yes.
not on the computer TV. Before you tell us about your podcast, Kerrie, we want here at Write Better Together, we have this thing called a Barnabas name, and that's a name that people have that you've given yourself or other people have given you that describe your personality or your personality traits. And we don't need to apply one to you because you already have one, Shivago. Tell people why you have Shivago tacked onto your name.
Oh, cool. Well, this is a story I actually haven't told too many people. So now everybody will know. But so I had a very traumatic experience. And I had the opportunity following that traumatic experience to reinvent myself and to choose my name. So I I chose a name that really meant a lot to me. I mean, not only do I have a Russian heritage, but Shivago was one of my favorite poets out of Dr. Shivago. I am a lawyer, so it fit really well, Dr. Shivago. But more importantly, it actually means life after. So
wow.
I gave myself that name, my legal name.
It literally
I
means
love that
life
so
after.
much.
Yeah, it means life after. So it was a perfect name to give myself.
Fantastic.
I love that so much. So another thing that John Myers just hinted at to me is that you have quite an interesting history with your family. Would you like to tell us about that?
Yeah, so I have a background that really lent itself to writing true crime and to writing about secret undercover subcultures, undercover infiltrations, because I actually lived in that sort of world when I was growing up, and I didn't know it. So I was my parents were CIA,
Wow.
and they were operatives, and so they worked in deep cover roles. And I didn't know that growing up, and I actually became part of their cover story in a lot of scenarios in order to protect them and to protect their secrets and protect the assets that they were recruiting. So it was a really strange way to grow up, because it was I didn't learn about it until I was 17. And
Wow.
I wound up having to question my whole life, really, like question what was real, what wasn't real, what were the stories and people. I mean, people I was meeting, were they actually friends of my parents? Were they actually working in tandem with them? Places that I had traveled to or gone to, I didn't know if they were actually real vacations or, places where dead drops were done. So it was a really interesting, sort of destabilizing way to grow up. A fascinating, interesting way, but also very destabilizing, because I really didn't have a handle on what was real and what wasn't. And so that led me into the whole world of writing true crime and writing other people's stories.
Talk about a life after. What did you think that, like, when you were in high school or when middle school, what did you think they were? Like, what did you think, what work they were going to do?
So they had really good covers. I mean, my father's cover was Foreign Service, and I know everybody laughs about that because that's like the cover that is the euphemism for CIA. But he actually had that as his cover, and so he could really very easily travel as a diplomat in all of these foreign countries that I grew up in, and so I didn't really think too much about. I mean, really didn't know very much about CIA or undercover work or anything. Growing up. And my mother was an English teacher. So by day they had these day jobs. And then they had these double jobs. So everything was sort of a double career, double life. Everything was very clandestine. So it was very strange and interesting because it led into me marrying initially a person who was undercover. And so, it was very obvious that I would do that. But at the time, I didn't realize how obvious that was. But it was pretty obvious to be living in that world because it was very familiar to me. And I just assumed everybody lived a double life.
Wow.
And your mom was an English teacher, and Emily and I are both English teachers. Now I suspect Emily, when she disappears, now I suspect where she might be going. Now we know.
I know. It's a really good cover. Yeah.
So did that also...
Go ahead.
Did that also influence you becoming an attorney?
No, actually, no. In fact, if I could have scripted my life, I never would have thought that I would go into law. And it was just circumstances. I mean, I started out as a poet, and I was writing poetry and studying poetry. I have 2 master's degree in poetry, and that was really my first love. I wanted to be a professor. I wanted to teach, and but the recession hit, and I could not find a job to save my life. I was like really poor. I mean, talk about a starving artist. I was a starving poet in the true sense of the word. And so, and I really, I got tired of starving is what happened. And one day, as I was flipping through the want ads, I thought, why don't I just use my brain to make some money and do something that at the time I thought I'm going to fund my true love by doing something practical. And so that's what I did. So I got into that, not even realizing that I would then get into criminal law and get into trial work and get into telling stories in a different way. So it was very interesting how it all just sort of like blended and worked together.
That is
I'm curious how that transitioned from, because you're clearly inspired by your family history, but then the things that you write in your podcast and all of that also seem highly inspired by you being an attorney. So what pushed you to finally put all of that together?
Well, it was actually completely by accident, but it all sort of fit. So my very first foray into nonfiction true crime writing was I actually started as a prosecutor because that's what people did. I got my law degree and I worked as a prosecutor. I got my trial experience, and I never, ever in a million years thought I was going to be a defense lawyer. Ever. It would never cross my mind. I thought I was going to be a career prosecutor because I was going in there. I was a crime fighter. I wanted to put people away. So, and then, of course, I was married to a law enforcement officer at the time. And so we had very opposite goals, obviously. Well, not initially. Initially, we were both putting him away. But then I wound up becoming a defense lawyer. And my very first case right out of the gate as a defense lawyer was a capital case. And so I wound up working this armed robber case that wound up going, like the issues that I had raised on appeal wound up going to the United States Supreme Court, and it overturned 180 death row cases nationwide. So here I was, just a brand new baby lawyer. And, and of course I had co-counsel at the time, but that's what happened with that first case. And so that sort of launched my law career. And as I got into capital work, I started to get into the pathology, criminal pathology, and realizing, okay, my job was literally to save people from death and to find the redemption in them and to find, what was the good in these people that the state was willing to throw away. And so I wound up really studying that sort of pathology, what was in their history and their background that made them who they were. But that actually didn't even start my true crime writing career, because I was married to this detective who, unbeknownst to me, was working a task force on one of these landmark criminal investigations, which happened to be an infiltration into the Arizona Hells Angels. And so at the time that he's working that, I was approached by the undercover operatives in that case, and they asked me if I would be interested in writing their story. Now, I had no experience at all writing nonfiction. I mean, I was a poet, and no idea that my husband at the time was also involved in this. So here I was, saying there's no way I'm getting involved in writing about a dangerous biker gang. Knew nothing about this culture other than they hated women, they were misogynists, they were all of these things. And lo and behold, they kept pressing, and I finally said yes. And so that's what launched my career. Running with the Devil was the first book that I wrote that came out of that, and that sort of set the stage for all of these other books that came out. And so to answer your question, how did I get into, I have two different kinds of crime writing. One I call the biker verse, which is the biker universe, where I really became an expert at investigating and writing about undercover operations and infiltrations and getting into that very dangerous subculture of outlaw motorcycle gangs who were really like the modern day mafia. And then the other side of that was the murder verse, which is writing about these very violent murders. And eventually that led into me wanting to do a podcast on a case that I represented, the murderess. So long and winding road.
So tell us about your podcast.
So the podcast is, it's a true story about a woman that I represent, and I've been representing her for over 10 years. So she was convicted of a very brutal murder. She was accused and convicted of murdering her husband, chopping him up, and like finding his torso in the desert. So it's a horrible, horrible case.
Wow.
And I came onto the case post-conviction. She's now serving a life sentence. It was initially a capital case, but the jury didn't sentence her to death. So I came onto the case, and for over 10 years, I've been investigating newly discovered evidence, trying to find a way to overturn the case, get somebody to look at it again, because I really do think I know who the real killer is, but we don't have enough. We don't have enough to land him. So it's a fascinating case of circumstantial evidence, and she has essentially no motive and no reason to have brutally murdered her husband. But she basically lost everything. There were lots of just what I call a parade of horribles in her case, where everything that could go wrong went wrong. And it's been really, really difficult to get this case back into court. So I did, extra DNA testing. I did investigation of the tire tracks at the scene. We found a number of different characters that had seemed to have their hands in it, but never could really point to the right person. And the person who I believe actually did it was granted immunity. So there were all kinds of bunny trails that we went down. And so a couple of years ago, I was back on the case, and I said, I don't know what else I can do legally, because my theory on this case was that it stemmed from a psychologically abusive relationship, and the law does not recognize psychological abuse. And so it was very difficult to actually bring that theory into the courtroom because there wasn't a basis for it in the law. So I thought, well, what else can I do to flip this theory and bring it to a different medium, a different audience? And podcasting is huge now. And, thanks to Serial and some of the other documentary series out there, I thought maybe this is good timing for me to do this. And so I proposed the idea to her. She was on board with it. She basically said, whatever you can do to bring this to a larger platform, I would love to have that done. Because I do really think it's a compelling case, and she has a story. And so I did it in 5 episodes, and didn't have any idea what I was doing, and have always been a little terrified of podcasting because I'm technologically an idiot, and always had these fears that if I started something, I wouldn't be able to finish it. So I really didn't know if I had the bandwidth to sustain a podcast. So then I went to WriterCon, and I got inspired by John's podcast and the whole idea
Hey.
of doing a narrative, a narrative nonfiction,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought, this actually might be something that I could do. So I took all of everything in it is taken from recordings, verbatim transcripts, interviews, either that I conducted or other agencies conducted. So everything in it is the verbatim language of it, and I had to figure out how to make it a story. Now, one of the complications of this case is that she is serving life in prison in a maximum security cell, and they don't allow any recording equipment in there. And it was just driving me crazy because there wasn't a way for me to interview her. So I couldn't get her current statements on there. I could go visit her. I could bring a little golf-sized pencil with me and a little legal pad in there. And so, what you see on television where they go in and they have these film crews in there. Yeah, that wasn't going to happen in this cell. So I had to find a way to tell her story using voice actor recreations. And so it took me forever to find the right Marjorie. So her name is Marjorie. And I had several people audition for that role, several times recorded, what I thought was going to be okay, but the voice actors were like overacting or not quite getting the nuances right. And I didn't want it to sound stupid, so it took me quite a bit of time to find the right voice actors, and and there were lots of characters in this, and had to find ones that would stay the course over 5 episodes. So that was very challenging.
So I've listened to the first episode, and so to hear you say that you didn't know what you're doing, or that you were a technophobe, or that you're a technical rookie is amazing, because it's super like NPR quality documentary style, but it does tell a story. And so, like I said, I've only listened to the first episode, and you're already hooked after that first episode, and it seems very, it puts you in the story world. It seems very authentic.
Thank you. That means a lot. Yeah, it took a year to do it, so it was so I don't know if there'll be many more coming down the pike, but it was definitely and I have to say that to hear my own voice as the host, like there was a period of time where I actually said to my my musical director, I said, can we just like replace me? Can we just have somebody else be me? be the host? Because it was really tough to hear myself talk.
I get that. Even just like, listening to this podcast is hard. It's hard to hear your own voice. I get it.
I love my own voice, so it's not a problem for me. So so right now, while we're filming this, we're on episode 3? Is that?
Yeah, the 4th episode is dropping tomorrow.
Okay.
So every Wednesday it'll drop.
So my question is, are you starting to get feedback from the people that are portrayed, or the people whose voices are there? Like,
the interesting thing is I have gotten some positive feedback, but not from the actors in it, which is surprising to me. I mean, it just reminds me that people, like, I care so much about things that other people, it's just not even on their radar, when it comes out. But so I haven't heard feedback from the actual people in it. Maybe they don't like to hear their voice either, but.
Well, but the characters, like, so where I'm going with this is the guilty guy that's still alive and walking around. Mm-hmm. Like, yeah. I want to know what happens when he listens to this.
Yeah, I want to know what happens too. My guess. Well, that's why I stayed with exactly what was recorded or testified to, or, you know, like there's nothing made up in this entire podcast because, you know, any flack that I get from him or lawyers that were involved, I don't think I would get flack, but if I did, you know, I would just simply say, look, I didn't testify to this. You know, this is not something that's made up. If, you know, and let me just say the volume of material that went into this, I'm talking like 15 plus banker boxes full of recordings and police reports and transcripts. And I mean, photographs, I mean, you name it. And it's in these boxes, not to mention the hours and hours I spent in the evidence room looking at exhibits. So it's, yeah, it's all pretty locked in.
What does Marjorie think about this at this point?
So Marjorie, I did it obviously with her permission and approval. She's, I think, very excited about it. She's happy with the product. And she's just hopeful that it's going to generate some buzz so that people start talking about it. I mean, you know, I don't know how that whole process works. I don't know how you get to that level where people are actually talking about, you know, who did it, but it's such a sensational case. And I think with the onset, I mean, Arizona seems to be like this hotbed of these kinds of murders, which is the craziest. It's even crazier, you know, like truth is stranger than fiction. But, you know, we have like the famous trunk torso murder. We have, you know, another woman, Valerie Pape, who got convicted of this. I mean, so there's this whole history in Arizona of this. And I think that if people start listening to Marjorie's case, that, you know, they may start looking at some of those other cases and saying, you know, this woman doesn't fit that profile. You know, Marjorie's case is different. And so, and I try to really make it obvious who the actual person is so that, I mean, my whole point is I don't believe that people can stay silent for 20 years for such a grisly murder. I mean, somebody talked somewhere, sometime to someone.
And it's a small town, and right? And so those people, they know. The people in the town already have their own suspects, right?
Yeah. I mean, I have to believe that. I have to believe that you cannot keep a secret, you know. I mean, and I should know, I know a lot about keeping secrets. And so, you know, it's really at some point, you know, to keep a secret like that. I mean, there were 3 people. So I did DNA testing and the DNA came back to 3 profiles. None of them were Marjorie, but the 3 people involved in this know what happened. They know the truth of this. And so, you know, you got to believe that they talked to somebody. There's got to be somebody out there.
This is total conjecture. What could compel so you're also driving home from Oklahoma City. I listened to Kerrie on a bunch of podcasts, and she is like the leading podcast expert on sociopaths. and episode after episode after episode, what compels these 3 people who have this DNA? How would you say that they've been able to keep a secret for this long? Like, what compels them?
Well, so I believe there's got to be threats and intimidation involved. There's got to be some leverage. I mean, the main guy who I think orchestrated this whole thing has something on the other 2. That's what I think. There's got to be some leverage. You know, and I believe that they had leverage over Marjorie, and that's how she went down for this. You know, I believe that they threatened her. They threatened her with, you know, taking her child, which is what she cares. So I think there's always a motivation for keeping a secret. But once that motivation is gone or lifted, then, you know, all is fair in love and war, basically. But that's my first and foremost thought. The second thing is, you know, what would compel somebody to do something like this? Well, one would be opportunity. The other would be, you know, if they truly are sociopathic, they would have no empathy. it would just be, practicality at some point. I mean, there's murdering the victim, and then there's chopping the victim up. Then there's freezing the victim. The state's theory was that it was frozen. So, I mean, there's all these things that compel a person to do the things that he does.
One of the things I learned, it was life-changing for me, I think I've told Kerrie this in an email, was that the difference between, like, sociopaths never have that pivot point where, like, they don't change. Am I summarizing that
Never
properly?
change.
Like, they that's what separates them from, like, a narcissist, is that they cannot have, because of how their DNA works, they can't have this moment of clarity where they're overcome by guilt. They never change.
Right. Yeah. There's no guilt or shame in that action. I mean, they're the ones that could literally be driving around the city with a dead body in their car and not have any, like, thought, not a second thought about it. Or they're the ones that will describe a brutal murder the same way that they describe cooking broccoli. There's just no degree there. There's no insight into what they're doing. So yeah, they're very, very scary people.
And so this is going to be my restating of something I learned. So if this makes any sense, tell me what that term was. So they do this thing where, so let's say a sociopath goes to college and they're like, oh, you went to college, how were your college years? And since they don't have an emotional connection to that college years, like Emily and I, we could actually answer that question. They can't answer it. So they'll say, well, when my brother went to college, he felt like, they'll tell you a story about someone else in their family and their emotions around the college experience or the birthday party or the thing. What is that called?
Yeah, so you described that really well. It's almost like they're taking their cue from somebody else. I mean, they call it the mask. They're basically wearing the mask of sanity. So they are mimicking right speech, right emotion, right cue, because they really don't have that within themselves. So they don't know how to act unless they're mimicking someone else. And so they look at somebody else's behavior or conduct and use that as an example. So you're right. That's a really good way of describing it. So it's a tell when you're hopefully not involved in a relationship with a psychopath, but if you are, that's one of the tells, is that they're going to borrow somebody else's experience to describe something that they haven't actually experienced it, but they're going to describe it as if they have.
So that was eye-opening to me, one, in real life, but also when you're forming characters, because I don't think people understand the extent of that, writers, when they're forming their antagonist or whatever. If they're really a sociopath, that they do that, right? So it makes your characters more realistic if they start mirroring the people around them.
Yeah. Well, it's one of that's why I'm so passionate about the work that I do, is I really believe so strongly in educating people about that pathology, because once you can identify it, you can save yourself a lot of heartache. And, and I also describe, like, when you're in the presence of a sociopath, there is something off about them. Like you will experience, they call it experiencing a sociopath. Like, you experience it, you feel a little uncomfortable, a little weird. Like, there's not sometimes the stare, the eye contact is very, very intense. And you feel like you're being, I described it once as being almost devoured by the person. It's not a give and take exchange. It's very much you're being studied, as an object. They're studying your cues, your emotional cues, your, everything, absorbing it in order to wear that mask. Well, hopefully I haven't chilled you. But I am fascinated by that subject. I mean, I have found just across the board, it's in a very weird sort of life imitating art. experience for me, just as a lawyer in the criminal arena, and then working as a writer, and then, coming across this one case that I wanted to turn into a podcast. I mean, it has been very interesting and difficult, and it's taken me a long time to figure out that balance on how to create that boundary so that I'm not living that world, and it's taken quite a number of years to be able to do that. But I think that I have enough perspective now. So now it's like in my rearview window where I can talk about it and analyze it. And it really, it took a number of books and experiences in order to get there. So I think that for the majority of people that are encountering these very dark energies, I call them psychological dark matter, and encounter that, it's very, very difficult to perceive initially. So,
and then in a lot of cases, like, again, this is so helpful to people that are listening or watching, and that if they think they're like, it takes a while, like you just said, for them to recognize it. But then once they recognize it, they're like, oh, I can change her, or I can change him. Well, no, you're not going to ever. And so once you realize that, it's time to just like move on, because it's not going to change.
Yeah. I mean, you literally are like, I describe this a lot as you're like gasoline to, the narcissist. You're the supply. And once the supply is gone, they move on. And I tell people that in the context of the law, which is, don't waste your energy, don't waste your breath, don't try to fix, solve, or even live with that energy, because it will ruin your life. I mean, it will change you, not them. So it's kind of a sobering thought.
Do you still write poetry?
I do still write poetry. I actually incorporate a lot of poetry into the writing that I do. I don't actually think that there's a huge difference in it. In fact, I think a lot of the genres will capture, like, I used to write fiction. So I wrote poetry, fiction, playwriting, and then got into nonfiction, which is really my favorite genre. But I think it incorporates really a lot of the same elements. Descriptions, I can't play so much with characters because I have the real people, but I can at least understand what motivates them and, how they feel about a certain situation. So I'm still doing a lot of method acting, getting into the heads of my people that I write about, trying to understand from their perspective. And that's really where my background is a gift in a lot of ways, because I know the world so well, so I can, not only imagine what they're going through, but probably have experienced it on some level.
I'm not ashamed to admit I know nothing about poetry, but Emily is also a poet. So we'll have Kerrie do the call to action in a second, and but before she does, ask her about some informed poet question about the intersection between poetry and this type of it's almost memoir-ish kind of.
Yeah.
It sounds like you have a question. You're just trying to get me to say it, but I can't read your mind.
No, I don't have the right. I'm transparent. I'm honest. I don't have the words to ask. I don't have the vocabulary to ask this question. I don't know. Help me.
Well, so you know what I love about poetry is that it's got this double entendre. It's the world of doubles, and that's how I feel like it is very applicable to what I write about, which is I can say something I'm a minimalist writer, I guess, and that's where a lot of poets are minimalists, because you can capture a feeling, a scene, a character in very brief amount of time, and you can say so much in the span of a very small amount of space. And so that's, right? Would you agree with that, Emily? It's definitely, it's powerful.
Yeah, I think one of the beautiful things of being a poet and writing other genres is poetry does teach you that conciseness. How can you pack all of that punch into a short space? And even if you're not, in poetry, you get to play around with lines and stanzas and all of that. But all the other things you can do in your paragraphs, that you can play around with all of those techniques. I also think this is a great conversation for our nonfiction listeners, who are telling stories about other people. Because I like what you said about you're digging deep into who are these people. One of the things, one of the really helpful books that I've read is called The Science of Storytelling by Will Storr. And even though it's mostly about fiction, he talks about how even in writing nonfiction, you want to look for what is the character, the person that you're writing about, what is their fatal flaw? What is their core belief that is just they are holding on to, and that is affecting every single thing that they do in their life? Maybe it was like this origin, like what is their origin story? What is the thing that has made them who they are? And exploring that, even for real people, not just like, it's not just fictional people who have that, it's real people.
Yeah, no, you said that really well. I think that's the crux of writing for me. That's really what I love about writing. It doesn't even matter what genre it is. It's just finding that that thread, that makes them relatable. It makes them human, even with a villain. And that's the challenge, right? I mean, even with a villain, they can be complex, although I don't actually believe they are. That's a whole nother discussion. But I mean, there's a consistency in people, and that I think that thread is also carried through in characters in fiction. I mean, the consistency is what makes them believable and authentic.
I love that. All right.
Yeah.
You have any last questions for her, Emily, before we get her to do a call to action?
I would love just to know if you have any final advice for our listeners, whether they're doing, a podcast of their own, or they are trying to tell nonfiction narratives. What advice would you give to them?
Probably the biggest thing, and this really applied to me, was to get out of your own way. Because I think that there's so many of us, I mean, myself included, where you have this imposter syndrome. And I have always been guilty of sort of editing myself off the page, basically. And the thing that really struck me in many of my books is just thinking about, I'm writing for one person, and that person can be your editor or it can be yourself. I mean, you're writing for one person because you're never going to please everybody, and you have to stay authentic to your style, your voice. And I can, and I know I'm guilty of this, where I can suddenly read a great book and, throw it across the room and say, what the hell am I doing?
Yes.
It's already been done. There's such brilliant writers out there. What am I doing? I'm trying to write something that nobody, so you can't play that game. You just have to believe in what you're doing and get out of your own way and stay the course.
Excellent.
I love that so much.
Good question and good answer. All right, Kerrie, we give our viewers, listeners, a call to action every week. That's where you tell them to go do something, writing related, creative, create something. And then Emily, so tell them what to do. And then Emily will tell them how to submit it to us. And then we'll play a game.
So this actually is, it's basically what I do with almost every book that I write. And it's find your watershed. So it's that watershed moment that transformed and informed the rest of their life. So it's either, if you're writing a memoir, the watershed moment for that person. If you're writing a character, what's the watershed moment? Because chances are, if you find that origin, and I call it watershed rather than origin story, because it can be different. So, like, what's that turning point that made them into who they are? Because that is the thread of the story. So, if your listeners do that with a character they're working on, or if they're stuck on something and they figure that out, that could change the trajectory of the story.
I got so goosebumps when you said that. All right, so how do they submit that, Emily?
So you all can go over to writebettertogether.com/podcast to find our show notes, where you can then respond in the comments. Or when we share this episode on Facebook, you can respond in the Facebook comments. You can respond on Instagram. We're used to just looking for it all over the place. And yeah, we would absolutely love to hear about those watershed moments.
Excellent. All right, here we go. We're trusting you, Kerrie, to be our first guest celebrity participant in the final act.
Oh my God.
And we are going to play a game called Explain It Like a Fifth Grader. And so Kerrie is going to either hold up something or tell us a concept of what she just talked about. She's going to do that 3 times. And so, and then John Myers and Emily will each describe that thing like a 5th grader. And then Kerrie has to pick who won. So 2 out of 3, you win. And so at the end, you will give us the score and say that John Myers won 3-0. No.
What does it mean to describe something as a 5th grader? Because I've seen Are You Smarter Than a 5th Grader? And 5th graders are real smart.
Just, okay, let's change it. Describe it like a 5-year-old. How about that?
Oh.
That's even better. It doesn't change Kerrie's job any, but it makes it even better for us. All right, there you go.
Okay.
That was a valid point, because 5th graders can be smart. Well, 5-year-olds can be smart too. All right, we're ready.
Okay, so am I just holding up the object?
You can hold up an object and tell us what it is, or you can tell us the concept of something that you just talked about in the last half hour, or both, because you're going to do 3 things. So here we go.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
We've set her quite the challenge.
She's infiltrated the Hells Angels. She can handle a game show.
Okay. Well, this is on my desk.
Oh. And what is it?
It's a bit blurry for me. Can you explain it?
If I explain it, does that ruin your ability to explain it as a 5-year-old?
Don't explain it like a grown-up, and we'll explain it like children.
So it is a spun glass heart paperweight.
Okay. So, Billy, my 5-year-old friend Billy, when grown-ups have so much paper on their desk that they, like, it starts falling off the desk, people will need this item to hold it down, because gusts of wind could come in at any moment. And that's how I would describe this item. Emily?
That's good.
Nellie.
Nellie?
Hey, Nellie. Look at that see-through heart thing. That's it.
Okay.
Spoken like a poet.
So don't tell us the winner of that round yet, and then you'll tell us the winner of all 3 rounds, 2-3 or whatever, 2-1 or whatever.
Okay.
And then next item or topic.
Okay. Can you see what these are? These are
gloves?
fingerless gloves.
So, Susan Grigsby, 5-year-old Susan Grigsby, my nemesis. Sometimes grown-ups get so cold, but they still have work to do, and they still have to be able to touch their phone. So there's this thing. Do you know what gloves are, Susan Grigsby? Well, these are gloves that don't have the tips on the fingers, because adults, unlike you, Susan Grigsby, have a future and they have to work for their future. Very mean to Susan Grigsby.
Ooh, that's a little esoteric. Yeah.
Emily?
Nellie, look at those gloves. They don't have any fingers. They just got...
Nelly again.
Why do they sound like a teenager? These gloves don't have any fingers because adults' fingers don't get cold.
Oh.
Only their big part of their hand gets cold.
Oh. We should have gone back and forth where you went first the second time.
Yeah.
So this time, the final time, Emily will go first.
Okay. Well, this might be old-fashioned.
Ooh.
Clock.
Oh no. That modern 5-year-old.
Correct.
Do they even know what a clock is? That's the question.
Yeah, they don't know how to tell time.
Look, look, Nellie, it's
Poor Nelly.
it's a clock that I don't know how to, this is hard. Clocks tell time, but I don't know how to tell time looking at it because I'm 5 years old. I'm drawing a blank here, y'all.
So Molly, whatever you do, this thing that Kerrie held up, do not tell your younger sister how it works, because when a grown-up says we have to go to grandma's house in 5 minutes, if your younger sister knows how to do that, then she's going to be like, is it time to go to grandma's yet? Is it time to go to grandma's yet? Is it time to go to grandma's yet? And so this device would actually answer that question, and none of us, no other 5-year-old wants to be bothered by that question all day. And so don't tell her how this device works. There you go.
Pretty good.
And the winner is?
Now, I have a challenge for you.
Ah!
Can you tell a story using all three?
Oh my gosh.
Whoa.
He's the host.
You want to go first? You want me to go first?
I want you to go first, so I have time to think.
We'll be trimming the part of us just sitting here thinking for a second.
You'd love to bring back Baggy right now, wouldn't you?
Right? I just had to guess the numbers or the letters in a bag.
See, and my brain would go to the telltale heart.
Yeah.
The ticking of the telltale heart.
The game show host cannot help one of the contestants. What the heck? There is a heart and there is a TikTok, so go on.
So Nelly, 5-year-old Nelly steps into her mother's office and sneaks into the room to see what time it is. But realizing that she can't read the clock, she asks her mom what time it is. And her mom is anxiously typing away with her fingerless gloved hands because it's cold, and ignores Nelly. So Nelly, seeing the heart-shaped paperweight, snatches it and sneaks it out of the room. And can you tell I'm making this up as I go?
Yes.
And her mom doesn't notice because she's typing away on the keyboard. And Nellie, who doesn't know what time it is, misses the bus. I don't know.
Misses the bus.
I just
Good.
no. I should start over. I won't start over.
The mystery of what she does with the heart. That could be the
What does she
sequel.
do with the heart? She she symbolically smashes it on the floor
To get her mother's attention.
to get her mother's attention.
Now you're helping again, Kerrie. What a violent ending to this story.
I didn't mean for it to be about a loveless relationship between a mother and child, but that's what happened. There we go.
Interesting.
So disappointed
So
by
sorry. I apologize.
disappointed by the previous events, Nellie has come over to my story. I'm going to borrow Nellie. So what do I have? A paperweight, fingerless gloves, and a clock. And Nellie would Nellie wants to go to her grandma's. Not that I haven't already covered that area. So Nellie's goal is to go to her grandma's, but there's an obstacle in that her mom has a pie in the oven, and that pie will not be done for 20 more minutes. So there's a ticking time clock. And so it's also the obstacle, right? Because so Nellie can't get what she wants until the pie is done. And so we had the clock. So she has smashed, in Emily's story, she has smashed the paperweight into a bazillion pieces. And so to kill the time and to make amends to her mother, because my Nellie is good and not violent, she puts the paperweight back together and glues it back together, cuts her hand while she's trying to repair it. And so her mom's like, I can stop the bleeding, and puts the fingerless gloves over the palm of her hand to stop the bleeding. And you would think that whole process took 20 minutes, and so they would live happily ever after. But at the end of the 20 minutes, the pie comes out of the oven, and I forgot her name. Nellie's mom says, well, I'm sorry, we still can't go to grandma's because your father and I are spies and we are off to Yugoslavia. The end. Twist ending.
Oh my God. That's fun.
Fantastic.
I like how both of yours went like violent or something.
Mine was repairing. Mine was repairing the violence. So who won, Kerrie?
Well, I have to say you won, John, the individual round, and I liked Emily's story incorporating all three of them.
That sounds like you didn't want to choose a winner. You're trying to spread the love around. So the prize, I forgot to say what the prize was ahead of time. There's always a random prize too. Was this one bear? The way we know it's one bear because it says right there, one count bear, and right on the tag from Target.
It looks like something that would go on top of a Kroger birthday cake.
It's from Target, so maybe it would go
there you
on
go.
Target. Thank you, Kerrie.
Thank you
Droban.
So much.
We could not have done it without you.
No, we couldn't have done it without you. We appreciate you so much.
Wow, this was a lot of fun. I appreciate you having me on and playing games. I mean, I love to play games, so that's pretty cool.
Great.
Now, and plus, now neither one of us will be able to sleep tonight after we have this murder haunting us. And okay, There you go.
Where can our listeners find you after after the podcast?
So they can go to my website, kerriedroban.com. The podcast name is called Crime Stands Still, and it's on all Apple podcasts, anywhere you listen to podcasts, it's there. So would love to hear your listeners' feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll add to that. I'll give them another call to action. They need to spread it around, right? So that the guilty guy can get his comeuppance. And so any of you TikTokers, we are not on TikTok. Any of you TikTokers, if you can make Kerrie's podcast go viral somehow, that would be fantastic.
That would be awesome. I'd give you a glass heart.
Yes.
A cold glass heart. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.